Transistor was Supergiant's second game. While Supergiant would later come to be known for Hades, the studio was at the time riding high on the success of their first game, Bastion. A game which earned them much critical acclaim and likely a great deal of commercial success. Bastion was going to be a hard game to top.
We quite quickly decided that we wanted to make something new. It might have been the kind of fiscally responsible decision to just make a Bastion 2 in light of the success of the first one, but we never thought of Supergiant as the Bastion studio. Bastion was just our expression of the kind of game we wanted to make.
Perhaps because of this, Transistor was a real swing for the fences, and you can clearly see the ambition in it to create something new and unique. Did the swing fully connect? In some areas, absolutely. Though in my estimation, there are some issues that hold it back from being wholly recognized as the classic it could have been. While this video will largely be about my perspective on the story, permit me to first describe the game itself for the benefit of those who missed it. So if you haven't played it, the defining feature of Transistor's gameplay is in its hybrid combat system. Hybrid as in a hybrid of real-time and turn-based combat. With the real-time combat, you use your selected combat abilities normally, but when the turn command is invoked, you pause the action, move around and queue up your abilities to be used in rapid succession. There's a cooldown afterward where you're locked out of most of your abilities. This is in stark contrast to games which have real-time with pause combat systems, which allow you to queue up actions that will resolve in normal time. There are vanishingly few games that have Transistor's kind of hybrid experience. Some games contain real-time and turn-based elements like those in the Total War series, and there are games where you can choose between a real-time and turn-based combat system like XCOM Apocalypse or Pillars of Eternity 2, but bringing the two combat styles together in the same combat encounter is quite unique, in my experience at least. I'd be curious if there are any other games that do this kind of thing that I may be missing. Let me know in the comments if you've played any. Anyway, it is in this combat system that some structural gameplay issues creep in. For instance, while I'm not going to say it's categorically impossible to balance a system like this, rarely did the balance feel right to me, oscillating between too easy and too hard rapidly. Though I will say the limiter system gives foes some additional buffs to add to the challenge. Even still, I believe this unevenness is largely due to the design of the ability system. Not merely content to have a unique hybrid combat system, the way abilities work are similarly bespoke. Throughout the game, you gain new abilities, or functions as the game calls them. These functions can be used in multiple different ways, as an active skill, a passive skill, or an upgrade to an active skill, improving it somehow. For example, Jaunt in its active form is an evasive dash. In its passive form, it speeds up the cooldown after you use the turn-based mode, and as an upgrade, it allows you to use an ability during that cooldown period. There are quite a few functions in the game to choose from, and on subsequent playthroughs, or recursions through the game, you can get additional copies of them to use, even with themselves. Now all that said, the meat of the difficulty comes in finding effective combinations of functions. Big emphasis on the word effective here. Not to be too flippant, but there's a lot of combinations that just kind of suck. It makes sense, of course, that there would be bad options in any system to contrast with the more desirable options, but here it feels like the combinations that feel genuinely powerful and satisfying to use are rather rare. This can be felt especially hard on your first run through the game, as you don't have many quality parts to work with until quite a ways into the run. Admittedly, maybe I'm just bad or unlucky. To its credit, the game encourages you to experiment with many different function combinations, although this encouragement is more stick and less carrot. When your health is depleted in a combat encounter, one of your active combat functions breaks and your health is replenished. From this point, you have to complete the combat encounter with whatever active combat functions you have left. If you lose your remaining active functions, you die and have to start the fight over, but if you beat it, you'll be locked out of using the broken functions for a checkpoint or two. This, in effect, forces you to change it up and use different active functions. I can see what they were going for with this, and it's actually pretty smart. Though I think they might have also encouraged experimentation from a positive approach, rather than having it being directly correlated to how much you're getting your ass handed to you. Though I will say you need to use the functions in each different way to unlock information on its associated person, but more on that later. Another positive approach could be giving small temporary bonuses to random functions at each checkpoint. Supergiant would later come to do this in Hades, giving a small, somewhat arbitrary bonus on a random weapon you can select each run, promoting trying out new weapons. Now all that said, as unique and compelling as Transistor's combat system is, it is entirely understandable that they dialed back these concepts in Hades, moving in more of a real-time roguelite direction. Perhaps Transistor and its function system offered too many choices at once, rather than the more discrete and clearer choices of which weapon, boon, and room reward you choose in Hades. That's how I feel about it anyway. Transistor's gameplay was undoubtedly innovative, but it asked a lot of the player, and I think many players were just not willing to go with it. I would absolutely love it if Supergiant took another crack at it in some kind of remaster, a Transistor recompiled or something similar that smoothed out the rough edges, as the ideas it has are worth it, but I digress. Another aspect of Transistor I want to highlight here is its aesthetics. While other aspects of Transistor could have used more revision, the dazzling spectacle of it all remains exceptional. The graphics of the game, mostly seen from the isometric perspective, are striking. The colors are quite vibrant and add a lot to the level design. There's a few drawn still cutscenes as well, which are a nice added touch. The UI elements in the game clearly had a tremendous amount of work put into them, adding a lot to the overall experience. All told, Transistor has a unique graphical style that elevates it beyond a sizable amount of its contemporaries. Now, I'd be a fool to talk about Transistor without mentioning its soundtrack. I would put pretty good odds on the total number of hours people have spent listening to the soundtrack being higher than the total number of hours people have spent playing the game even. Supergiant's composer, Darren Korb, who, I cannot stress this enough, also did the voice acting for Zagreus, delivered one hell of a soundtrack in Transistor. It would have likely been the easiest thing in the world to turn in a generic half-baked bleep-bloopy soundtrack to match the setting, but here the tracks really evoke feeling and place, particularly the songs with sung vocals. Alongside the strong visual and audio theming, the game is also steeped in the aesthetic of computer science. One of the first things you hear in the game is Hello World, the output of the first function many students write. A sizable number of places in the game are named after computer science terms as well. Even on a gameplay level, the concept of invoking functions using other parameterized functions fits well with the aesthetic too. Towards the end of the game, as the world decays, the game lists certain places by memory addresses even. It's not exactly subtle about its influences here if you're familiar with the concepts. Anyway, with all that said, if any of that sounds interesting enough to play through before hearing a story analysis, I would advise checking it out on Steam. A single run is relatively quick, though you'll get a lot more out of the gameplay with additional recursions. If you're on a 4K monitor, you'll have to throw on some launch parameters to get it to full screen semi-properly, but beyond that it's aged pretty well. Though I will say it's pretty funny the game, much like the functions in its combat system, needs parameters passed in to work best. I'll warn you again though, the gameplay is definitely not everybody's cup of tea. I find it wonky at times, especially in that first playthrough, but it may still be worth a look all the same. Okay, so something about Transistor that quickly becomes apparent when playing it is how the game goes to great lengths to not spell out the exact nature of, well, pretty much anything. This too was something of a bold choice in its development. A lot of this could normally be chalked up to the rule of cool and all, but here you're never told some rather large details. For example, the name of Sword Boyfriend Online. While plot beats happen and characters interact throughout the course of the game, the underlying nature of the world itself is concealed from the player. I was rather put out by this when I played it for the first time, particularly in how the game itself seems to taunt you for wanting a more grounded meaning.
That I believe, is the transistor's true purpose, its true nature.
Wait, can you repeat that?
I can kinda see what they were going for now, though, but I can't help but wonder what a few more brushstrokes would have revealed. Anyway, because of this, any discussion of large parts of Transistor's story will be inherently speculative, or, to put that another way, there is no one fixed, confirmed universe supported entirely by the text. This commentary is merely my perspective, the themes and imagery that come to mind for me, and I'm certainly not putting it forward as the one true interpretation. Quite the opposite. I'd be very interested to hear what the story means to you in the comments. Right, so Transistor takes place in the city of Cloudbank. That much can be said factually, at least. But immediately the question arises, what is the world Cloudbank exists in? Above the waterline on any Transistor theory iceberg would surely be the idea that Cloudbank exists in some kind of virtual world. To me, even though this is never stated directly in the text of the game, there is so much circumstantial evidence that I would have a very hard time imagining that this is not the case. There are a lot of glowing neon signs everywhere basically screaming it. There's the aforementioned plethora of computer science references, the impossible teleportation between locations, and the fact that the friendly living entities you encounter are reduced to the functions you use in combat. If this isn't a virtual world, it must be an entirely different universe with entirely different physics. One could still make an argument for this deeply alien physical world, of course, and it's an intended effect of the writing that such is even on the table as a possibility. But to me, a virtual world fits much more cleanly, thematically and otherwise. There's too much of our world, however askew, to make me believe it is an entirely alien universe as well. The question then becomes, who are these denizens of this virtual Cloudbank? Are they sprites controlled by various forms of AI? Avatars controlled by flesh and blood in front of a screen? This, to me, is perhaps the most interesting question to consider in the game's universe. It also makes perfect sense that they would not answer this particular question, revealing the characters as mere simulations or committed role players could make the stakes considerably less impactful than if the world is taken directly. For the record, I see both possibilities as completely valid. However, this analysis is going to operate on the assumption that they are, in fact, humans behind screens. If you're a bigger fan of the AI hypothesis, or other perspectives, I totally understand and respect your position, but go with me here. I promise this will be worth your while. There are quite a few data points that I believe point to Cloudbank being an online community. I'll start with what I consider the strongest evidence and work my way down from there. A few rare glimpses of the wider world of Transistor can be found in the OVC terminals. While it's never revealed what the acronym itself stands for, the OVC seems to be some sort of community platform with news and voting. It seems to shape a large amount of the discourse in Cloudbank, very prominent in many of the backstories of the people with corresponding functions. Red, the protagonist of the game, and her significant other deliver commentary on what they find in these terminals. Given the criticality of discourse to any online community, the presence and seeming importance of these terminals definitely fits the online community model, though the system's existence doesn't necessarily prove anything on its own. There's a few OVC terminals in the game that I think are pretty telling, but the one that I think sheds the most light on the nature of the world is entitled Farewell to Cloudbank. As I stand here on the eastern perimeter awaiting the inevitable, I am surrounded by my community, and I am at peace. It has been my honor and privilege helping spread the news of the day among the people of this city, and my only regret is having no more time to share with you all. To the west I see nothing, and to the east there is nothing. And so we wait together, shoulder to shoulder. We will not leave our fair city under any circumstance. I suspect even the process has figured that out by now. Farewell. So there's a few different implications to unpack here, but let me start with the big one in the title of the piece. Temporarily assume the denizens of Cloudbank are not avatars. Put yourself in the shoes of the reporter reporting on the impending end of everything and everybody they have ever known. Wouldn't you title the article something a little more grave? But no, here the focus isn't on mass loss of life or the end of their civilization. The emphasis is on the end of Cloudbank, specifically. This hints that life must continue elsewhere, despite the devastation of the community. There is also the very telling line in the article, "We will not leave our fair city under any circumstance." This line, like most things in the game, can be read a variety of different ways, but to me it sounds like somebody going down posting on a faltering internet community. Implied also in the line is the capacity to leave Cloudbank, yet adamant refusal to do so. If the stakes were truly life and death, deciding to go down with the city would be a strange choice, to say the least. More than anything else, this article reads like a final blog update, or a pinned community post in a dying MMO's forum. This article does not read civilization-ending catastrophe. This reads, the forum is going down because nobody can figure out how to renew the domain. Not that the loss of a quality online community, particularly a highly active one, isn't a tragedy, of course, but the focus is always on the city, the community, not on any loss of life here. On the note of the digital lives of those in the community, there are a lot of interesting implications in the profiles of those integrated into the Transistor. Their traces, the essence of their presence in Cloudbank, were violently forced into the Transistor by the Camerata. If you believe these characters are artificial intelligences, it is them personally being imprisoned in the Transistor itself. But this doesn't quite gel with the jovial willingness of the first person you yourself integrate. Anyway, the most interesting implications of these profiles are found in the community reactions to the characters sword-zoned by the Camerata going missing. Or, to be more precise, the complete lack of reaction. All of these characters disappeared from Cloudbank, yet the overall community seemed not to notice, or otherwise hand-wave their disappearances away. This makes it seem like people randomly leaving a community is fairly expected. This could be for a variety of reasons, of course, but in the context of an online community of humans, it could read as somebody going inactive and moving on with their lives elsewhere. Not exactly an unheard of circumstance. This lack of community reaction to the disappearances also implicitly reveals the lack of family structures in Cloudbank. There are marriages and relationships in Cloudbank, this much is clear from the text of the game, so where are the families of those who have disappeared? My best guess, they're offline in the real world. I think the best explanation for this fact pattern is that we are seeing people in an online community behaving like those in contemporary online communities, living only a part of their lives online. There's also the ages of the characters in Cloudbank, mostly in their 20s and 30s. One of the antagonists is listed as having an advanced age at 55. This could mean a few different things. If they're all artificial intelligences, this could mean that after a certain point in time, their programming becomes unstable and they pass on, recycled into the country. Or, what I think is the most likely case, they just lose interest in the community and log off. Aging out of an online community isn't exactly an unheard of concept. Different online communities have different demographics, and Cloudbank definitely seems aimed at the creative 20s and 30s types. And these community members? They're definitely posters, all of them making their mark on the community in different ways, defining themselves. Red herself definitely has poster's blood, commenting on every public terminal she comes across. The loss of her voice, something of an ironic denial of this calling. On that note, the Camerata's actions in the plot can also be understood as a struggle for control of an online community. The Transistor itself seems to confer full power to do whatever they want to Cloudbank, none too subtly letting Red pseudo the root user, relative to the more limited powers of administration presumably used by others. The Camerata, disenchanted with the state of the community, wanted to shape things with this power, instead of just leaving for the country as many other disengaged users likely did. This kind of struggle is not exactly unheard of in many real-life online communities. Ultimately, their meddling led to the disaster they unleashed with the process, which seems to have been issued some kind of reformatting command thanks to them. The process itself is hinted to have always existed in Cloudbank, and it does make sense as an advanced community software backend of a kind, evolved and taken to an extreme. There's also the personal drama between Sybil and Red. Sybil desperately wants to be with Red, but is rejected and essentially sets up Boyfriend Blade to be eliminated as vengeance, leaving him in the Transistor. This kind of exceptionally messy relationship drama is also well-trodden ground in online communities, to say the least, particularly in how often it comes out in struggles over community direction. On the lesser end of evidence, there's also a variety of terms used whose commonly understood meanings only really make sense in a virtual world that the denizens who live in it know is a virtual world. For example, defunct districts of the city described as offline rather than other potential descriptors. Offline evokes picking from a list of servers and entering one, rather than describing a place where people live and work. It's also worth pointing out that the dates posted all over the game are explicitly in human-readable format, mostly ending in 66 and 67. This is interesting by itself in that this pegs the events of the game to some potential human years, 2067, 2167, and so on. But it also hints that humans are the consumers of this information. I would be very, very surprised if AIs decided to store dates in this format, given its ambiguity. It would probably be in Unix time or some other kind of fully readable timestamp. Anyhow, I will admit there are some story elements that straight up don't fit with the model of this being a virtual world for humans. For example, when Civilization 4 Boyfriend the Sword is affected by the spine and loses his rapier wit, that seems to be genuinely affecting his being. One could still make the argument that this is from the interface with the virtual world, perhaps some ultimate immersion where people's states in the game can genuinely affect their bodies. This is, at a minimum, the far future after all. In that vein, it may even be the case where people are human-AI hybrids.
Oh, yes.
Such is not entirely unheard of in games. It would certainly explain some of the elements of the setting that don't make a whole lot of sense with the characters either being fully AI or fully human. If you're of a certain age, you've probably been part of one or more dead online communities. From tiny groups hosted on the BBS systems of the early internet, to whole platforms like MySpace and Vine, the internet collectively has moved on from a great many online communities. But the best stories aren't generally in the depths of these massive sites. They are found in the countless smaller groups that have undergone struggles. There are a huge number of smaller online communities spun up in the gaming space, often for those playing games in a given guild or alliance. A great many of them on forums which have been lost to time. If even a fraction of them have experienced some of the things I've seen and the ones I've been a part of, there are a truly massive number of untold stories out there. Take for example an instance where the forums of an alliance I was a part of were taken down by the person hosting them because one of the other alliance leaders insulted their wife. A community of hundreds shut down in an instant because of interpersonal conflict. Fortunately, somebody saved a copy of the database and was able to restore the community, which went on to have many more entertaining years. But this was quite the near-miss extinction event. One of the more interesting online communities out there is Something Awful. Many prominent and/or infamous figures of the contemporary internet can trace their origins there. At one point, it was even one of the biggest forums on the web. Now, it is far smaller. Yet even in these late years, its remaining goon denizens generate astounding content. Incidents like the Yikesaroo. I swear to God, between this and the Troubles, goons should not be allowed to name anything. Anyway, it came out that failed Let's Player and Something Awful site owner, Richard Low-Tax Kayenka, had been getting into some real dire shit. The exact dire shit is outside of the scope of this video, but I'm confident you can dig it up with some basic searches. Anyhow, this presented an immediate crisis for the denizens of Something Awful. questions were immediately raised about remaining on a site owned by Lotax. Some questioned if the site could even continue, that this would be the crisis that would see the end of the community. A score of Life Raft Discord servers were quickly spun up by members of various subforums, as many feared losing touch with each other completely. After a painful amount of time, the site was finally sold to a new owner, ending the crisis.
Admin's just towing the line.
The community remains intact to this day. These fearful moments with the potential for everything to be lost highlight the true value of online communities. Speaking for myself, being part of these online groups while growing up fostered a well-needed feeling of, well, community, of being part of something, of getting new insight about any number of topics, of enriching one's life experience in general. Not all online communities are created equally though. Oh Lord Almighty, are they not? I can only imagine the terror many parents face in many of the online communities that dominate modern headlines. Yet still, I maintain there are quality online communities out there that can enrich people's lives. Turning back to Transistor, by all accounts, Cloudbank was one of the good ones. You can tell that it's a community deeply enjoyed by its denizens, despite the frustrating limitations imposed by its structure. It's the kind of virtual space that seems designed to emphasize creativity, the kind of space those hacks at Meta could only dream of creating in their ridiculous metaverse attempts. Regardless of its nature, Cloudbank will surely be missed. Now before I close out this video, let me mention a few things that didn't quite fit elsewhere. There's a short story that immediately comes to mind when discussing Transistor. E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops, which depicts a society run by a great machine that the denizens of the society no longer have any meaningful understanding of, and it all comes crashing down when they can no longer maintain it. I strongly recommend checking it out. It's easily found for free online. The work is terrifyingly prescient, especially for a work that was published in 1909. Of course, this isn't anything near a one-to-one of the fall of Transistor's society, the fall of Cloudbank being more for the hubris of a few residents than a grander societal failure, but it does evoke the interesting question of why the denizens of Cloudbank similarly seem so completely ignorant about the mechanisms by which their world is maintained. Anyway, check out The Machine Stops if you get a chance. It's not long. Would be great if somebody made a high-budget movie out of it, though I suppose modern audiences probably wouldn't appreciate the downer ending. Thinking on online communities that have passed on also makes me wonder about the relative permanence of the major platforms that dominate online spaces today. While so much of the early internet has been lost to history, these more permanent, mature platforms make me wonder how future generations will come to view some of this stuff made by those who have passed on. In the long run, I can't help but wonder if YouTube will someday feel like a kind of mausoleum of voices from the past. It certainly can feel that way already when looking at some of the earliest videos on here. Perhaps I myself have long since passed, and you're watching this decades or even centuries in the future. It's admittedly hard to even conceptualize what that might look like, but it's more of an opportunity than most average people have ever had to tell their stories across time, so for that, I am grateful. All in all, Transistor is a fabulously unique game. It took a daring leap in terms of both gameplay and story. I'm deeply grateful that it was made, and that the studio that made it seems to be thriving more than ever. While it didn't shake gaming conventions up as much as perhaps was hoped, it still remains an artistic marvel and an interesting take on hybrid real-time turn-based combat. Supergiant will probably never revisit the world, or even remaster the game at this point. They never even made a sequel until Hades went supernova after all. So we may never get the real answers as to what the deal is with Cloudbank, but to me, it evokes images of online communities past, and their often drama-filled and messy demises. A reminder of the influence of online communities today, and a nostalgic memento of what's been lost.